To mostly sunny and 54 right now. Your next news update is at 7. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560. The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. As I mentioned, an under-discussed aspect of the financial squeeze many Americans are feeling, auto and home insurance. This is in part why, according to findings published by the National True Cost of Living Coalition, 2/3 of Americans whose incomes are 200% above the national poverty line, which is like basically the median household income, about $62,000 for a family of four, are said they're struggling financially. 2/3 median household income struggling financially. Well,
living paycheck to paycheck.
The Journal had a good op-ed on this topic over the weekend because, of course, with like you heard from that octogenarian with the blue hair from Connecticut last week, talking about why don't we get in there and regulate food prices, put caps on it. Rose DeLaura from Connecticut is going to be our food czar, our grocery czar. Well, so Senator Pocahontas, her neighbor to the north there in Massachusetts, will be our insurance czar. Of course she will. Going to take on big corporations, right? The financiers of the Democratic Party. Auto insurance rates are up 46% since January of 2020. That's more than in the 8 previous years combined.
That's January of 2020?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Homeowner premiums have increased almost 40% since 2019 and another 6% in the first 3 months of this year. The second worst state for these premium spikes over that period of time.
Illinois.
Yeah, it's Illinois. Number one premium spike over that period of time, 2019, 5 years.
California or New York.
Arizona, 62%. Illinois, 57%.
Wow.
57% spike in homeowner insurance premiums for properties that are declining in value because of property taxes. Again, the double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, sextuple whammy in Illinois, but we seem to like it, so it's fine. Also looking at cars, I know you mentioned auto insurance rates up 46%, but used and new vehicle parts have increased 29% and 21% since January of 2020. Yeah. Prices for vehicle parts have increased by 22%. Repair costs are up 48%.
Yep.
And, oh, by the way, it's not going to get better. For example, home construction material prices, labor costs have climbed roughly 38% over that time, so insurers are paying more for reinsurance against catastrophic events. Additionally, last year, property and casualty insurance paid out $101.70 for every $100 they collected in premiums. Well, that's not sustainable, clearly, for a business that needs to make profits to continue to exist. So don't expect any relief in the near term. The other interesting thing they point to, the progressive, meaning movement Marxist, anti-police movement, reduced traffic enforcement, arguably resulting in more reckless driving and accidents. Deaths from alcohol-related crashes have risen by 1/3 since 2019. Even as arrests for DUI and traffic citations have fallen by 1/5. Well, there you go. Sort of Fox Butterfield effect meet cause, right? You're sort of describing in part why that dynamic exists. So, the auto insurance and your homeowner's insurance, those are substantial numbers on an annualized basis.
Yeah. My auto insurance went up 20%. And I have a clean record. I've had no accidents, and I called, and you keep calling, but it doesn't matter. It's like where you live. And my dear friend who lives on the south side, they just dropped her. And she didn't even have an accident or a ticket. They said, sorry, it's where you live. It's your zip code. And they completely dropped her.
Yeah, we're tired of paying for carjackings.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's
Even though her car was never stolen, but that's,
it's understandable. For more on this and other dollars and cents issues, we're pleased to be joined by Judge Glock, Director of Research at the Manhattan Institute, and author of The Dead Pledge, The Origins of the Mortgage Market and Federal Bailouts, 1913 to 1939. Judge, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, I mean, just, the larger discussion about the distortions created during the pandemic, obviously, but since they're the misdiagnoses that lead to policies that exacerbate the problems and thus the problems with middle-income Americans paying their bills.
Exactly, and it's a vicious cycle. Exactly the sort of problems created by the bad regulations, the bad litigation, the bad burdening of these corporations with excessive charges and other regulations leads to demands for more regulations, more litigation against corporations, and so forth, which further drives up the prices.
And you did a deep dive on Chicago for City Journal, the publication produced by the Manhattan Institute, on Chicago and Chicago's financial condition. Most of it is nothing that we're not familiar with and we haven't been screeching about for many, many years to no particular effect. But is there anything that particularly surprised you as you think about it in sort of the larger compare and contrast to other major cities to what's going on in the country generally?
Yeah, I mean, Chicago is in a league of its own, as you and I'm sure many of your listeners know, in terms of its debt burden. Technically, New York City has a little more debt per taxpayer, but if you add Chicago's, both the state debt, obviously, of Illinois, which is also basically non-pareil in terms of having no real comparison elsewhere, and all of these other local government bodies, thinking about, obviously, the Chicago School District, but also Cook County, also things like the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and, of course, tax increment financing districts, all this complicated morass of government structures layered on top of each other. Chicago really is far and away the most debt-burdened big city in America.
What do you see coming in the short term? Because, part of the reason I think you can't get people to buy in is because, well, it's a kleptocracy. So, I just want to get mine and get out. And that becomes sort of the culture. You understand this. A lot of Chicago residents don't seem to. And the Chicago residents that are going to get left holding the bag. What does that look like? I've said for a while now, I'm pretty much convinced that until like a fire or police pension fund is unable to pay current beneficiaries, I just don't think any of this discussion of the city's finances will be real.
It's going to be tough, and the problem is that it's unlikely, I will say, not impossible, definitely, that the city of Chicago would go into some sort of bankruptcy. Now, current state Illinois law does not allow it to enter bankruptcy, so they need a special new law, which would be a whole nother mess. But what more likely happens with the debt, and this is often a similar sort of argument I make with the federal debt, is that people focus too much on this big blow-up, the possibility of a crisis,
right,
and ignore the larger problem, which is the debt just saps the energy of the economy and gradually drives entrepreneurs away in Chicago. And that's what you've seen. You've seen a city that's obviously seen a lot of population loss over the past 70 years, but which is still smaller, which is losing residents more than just about any other major metropolitan area over the last few years since the pandemic, which has a poorer than average population with higher than average taxes, which has seen businesses flee out. And you've seen the vacancy rate in the downtown Loop area in the offices reach about a fourth. That's the property taxes that was powering the city and allowing them to pay these lavish pensions and make these absurd promises. But if those businesses flee, there's really not that base anymore, and that just leads to another vicious cycle where more people flee and the taxes have to go up on the people that remain. And that doesn't mean a bankruptcy crisis, but that just means a gradual decline, which is not ideally, obviously,
So
what we want to see.
Yeah, since Chicago's population is shrinking, so those of us who have to stay because of family reasons, so what does that mean for us? Increased property taxes? What else can they possibly tax us on?
It means you're gonna live in a third world city. I mean, that's what it means. That's what I think. That's what you're saying. You're going to see, not just that this becomes repellent to businesses, but I mean, look at what's happened in New York City with Eric Adams and having to make police cuts because of all the money they're spending for the illegals that they welcomed into New York City, for example. So the system starts to seize up, as you're saying, Judge. It may not be bankruptcy, but your quality of life continues to decline. You start to feel the city is becoming more and more ghettoized. I certainly do, coming back and meandering about. And it just becomes, sort of you still have people, the upwardly mobile people. I talked to them on the golf course. I'm like, oh, you live in Wicker Park. How's it going? Oh, it's great. We love it in the city. We've been there 15 years. The kids are at lab school now. Well, it's going to be great for him and his family, and they'll probably be fine for 4 years. And when the kids get out of high school, they're going to go to college somewhere else. They'll be out of Wicker Park, and nobody's backfilling that guy. And that's what happens. But that takes a long time to really feel the impact. Because there's so many guys like that, and then the rest are just beneficiaries of transfer payments. That's a terrible way to model a big city.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, one of the biggest problems you see is the decline in the police force. If you look at the city employment levels, the one area that's seen real cuts over the past 10 years has been the police force. Now, Mayor Brandon Johnson supposedly said, I'm not going to cut one penny from the police force before he was elected. But if you look at what he's cutting in terms of vacant positions, in terms of potential services that provided to the police, those are the one real expenses going down. And that's the thing that Chicago needs most of all to maintain its quality of life. You mentioned all of these basic concerns about people feeling a lack of order in the city. A recent report showed that about half of high-priority 911 calls had no police available to answer them immediately, which should be, again, the base-level requirement for a city, to have a police available to respond if someone is in desperate need. But the budget cuts, just the cuts to the base police force and the inability to keep up with the crime has been one of the most concrete examples of this budget crunch and how it's affecting normal citizens.
Well, and we say this all the time, too, is that, these cities are not inexorable. Their existence is not inexorable. It is not written in scripture that Chicago or New York will forever exist as the major metropolises of America or of the West, that it will have this population and this quality of life. And so, the deterioration comes slowly, and then it's starting to come more rapidly. And you just wonder. I mean, my feeling is that somewhere, I don't know where and I don't know when, but somewhere there's going to be some sort of revolt, and there's going to be something unexpected that happens politically. I mean, in terms of electing somebody that you would have never thought could get elected in Baltimore or St. Louis or Chicago or New York or LA. Somebody is going to break from this hold that movement Marxists have on urban America.
Yeah, and you saw this, of course, in many places in the 80s and 90s. Of course, people like Rudy Giuliani in New York City, where you had very liberal electorates that seemed very much in hock to the public employee unions and the defunding the police of that era equivalent. And then all of a sudden, people just reached a breaking point, and they realized that we're not going to put up with this. The number of normal citizens who are taxpayers and who care about public safety is just much larger than the number of citizens who want to collect checks from the government indefinitely. And at some point, that mass of people will speak up, hopefully. Now, you do have the alternative of a city like St. Louis or Detroit, of course. Now, Chicago's population has declined a bit since the 1950s. Both Detroit, which everyone knows about, but also St. Louis, they've seen about 70% of their population leave, which is, of course, just an unmitigated disaster. Now, they refuse to take action. They refuse to take on taxes and quality of life issues, and they suffer the consequences. Like you say, this is not inevitable. But I think what you saw in the 80s and 90s after the last big crime surge and the last big fiscal crisis in cities is a lot of citizens revolted, as you mentioned, and a lot of them were able, at least for a while, to turn the ship around.
Judge Glock, Director of Research at the Manhattan Institute, author of The Dead Pledge, The Origins of the Mortgage Market and Federal Bailouts, 1913 to 1939. Judge Glock, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Hi, I'm Charlie Moon. I've been in the trading game for almost 20 years, and I just discovered the most powerful trading tool I've ever seen. So if you're trading stocks or options, then listen up.